You might assume that all Buddhists are vegetarians, but is that really the case? From the outside looking in, it's easy to paint all followers of Buddhism with the same brush, believing they all adhere to a strict vegetarian diet. Yet, the reality is far more complex. The Buddhist approach to vegetarianism is as diverse as the faith itself, with differing views and practices across its various sects. To understand this, let's delve into the life of the Buddha and his views on meat consumption. The historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, wasn't strictly vegetarian. This statement may surprise some, considering the widely held perception of Buddhism's close association with vegetarianism. Yet, the Buddha's approach to meat consumption was far from rigid. He did not enforce a blanket ban on meat consumption among his disciples. Instead, he offered a more nuanced perspective. It's important to understand that the Buddha lived in a time when monastic communities were dependent on alms for their sustenance. These communities couldn't afford to be choosy. They ate what was generously given to them, which sometimes included meat. The Buddha, however, did set certain guidelines. Meat was permissible as long as the animal wasn't killed explicitly for the monk, and the monk hadn't seen or heard the animal being killed. This approach showcased the Buddha's practical wisdom, balancing compassion for living beings with the realities of life in his time. So, where does this leave the idea of vegetarianism in Buddhism? Buddhist ethics provide a nuanced perspective on meat consumption. Not all Buddhists are vegetarians, and this is rooted in the teachings of the Buddha himself. Monks in the time of the Buddha were allowed to eat meat under certain conditions. Picture this. A monk is given food as alms. Among it is meat. The monk didn't ask for it, nor was the animal killed specifically for him. In this case, he could eat it without infringing upon the first precept of Buddhism. This precept emphasizes non-violence and the sanctity of life. It's a guiding principle that shapes the moral fabric of Buddhism. Yet consuming meat that wasn't killed for one's consumption isn't seen as a breach of this precept. It's a delicate balance, a middle way that allows for the realities of life while upholding the core ethical principles of Buddhism. Yet in modern Buddhist practices, views on vegetarianism can vary significantly. Across different Buddhist traditions, attitudes towards vegetarianism differ. Modern Buddhism is a tapestry of diverse perspectives, reflecting its historical evolution and cultural adaptations. Some sects emphasize vegetarianism more than others, highlighting the dynamic relationship between Buddhist teachings and cultural contexts. For instance, in the Mahayana tradition, particularly prevalent in East Asia, vegetarianism is often encouraged, resonating with the doctrine's emphasis on compassion and non-violence. However, this is not a universal stance. In Theravada and Vajrayana traditions, found commonly in Southeast Asia and Tibet, the consumption of meat is not strictly forbidden, reflecting the historical context of these traditions, where monks rely on alms for sustenance. These divergent views underscore the multifaceted nature of Buddhist teachings, reminding us that Buddhism is not a monolithic tradition, but a rich mosaic of beliefs and practices shaped by time and geography. But what does this mean for the practical application of Buddhist teachings? In Buddhism, the middle way is key, even when it comes to diet. This doctrine of moderation suggests a balance between indulgence and deprivation, avoiding extreme rigidity. It's not about adhering strictly to a vegetarian diet, but about cultivating mindfulness and compassion in our dietary choices. Imagine you're at a family gathering and your grandmother, unaware of your vegetarian commitment, lovingly prepares your favorite pork chops. In such instances, the middle way encourages compassion over strictness. It's about understanding the intention behind the meal, a gesture of love, not a deliberate act of violence. This is the beauty of the middle way. It allows for flexibility, understanding, and compassion in our dietary practices. It's a gentle reminder that the essence of Buddhism is not about rigid rules, but about cultivating wisdom and compassion in all aspects of life. Remember, in Buddhism, wisdom and compassion guide not just our dietary choices, but our broader spiritual journey. So, not all Buddhists are vegetarians, and that's okay. We've journeyed through the diverse landscape of Buddhist perspectives on vegetarianism, from the Buddha's own approach to the varied modern views. Remember, The crux of Buddhism isn't about rigid dietary rules, but about wisdom and compassion. It encourages us to consider how our choices, dietary or otherwise, align with these principles. After all, Buddhism teaches us to question, explore, and find our own path to enlightenment.